Hello everyone, this is part 7 of What If Naruto Was Abused and Leaves Konoha, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Naruto would have literally leapt out of the bed in excitement if it wasn't for the bundle of red hair pressed up against him. Instead, as to avoid the likely punch to the gut, he merely shifted his position slightly, noting the strange feel of something tugging at the boxes he wore. He turned a most violent shade of red when he realized exactly what it was and his eyes opened wide. He was most definitely awake now, although he hoped he couldn't say the same for his friend. Get your knee out of my ass cheek, shithead. Naruto would have sighed in relief if he didn't think that would have alerted Tayuya to his friends, wake up. He quickly adjusted himself before sliding out from behind Tayuya, still thoroughly embarrassed by everything that had happened so far. He heard her mumble, complaining about him taking away her heat, but right now he felt like enough of it was rushing to his cheeks. He had a long shower and only risked getting out when he was sure that he wouldn't have a repeat of this morning. For the longest time he just stared at it, wondering what the hell was going on today. It had certainly never done that before. It was such an awkward situation because usually he would go to Tayuya about things like this, except for some reason he didn't think that would be the best idea. Then again, they so rarely held secrets from one another, and even if they did, it was never for very long. Naruto felt so conflicted about what to do before his sleep-addled mind finally realized he had another friend, one that was more likely to understand his situation. He still felt uncomfortable about keeping something from his oldest friend, but right now he could live with it if it meant avoiding the inevitable embarrassment. In fact, now that he thought about it, Naruto couldn't even think why he was embarrassed at all, but he knew that he should be. He got dressed very quickly, smiling as he saw that Tayuya had barely moved, instead only wrapping the sheets around her tighter to ward off the cold that Naruto's absence created. In her mind he was still better than a blanket, like her own personal heater. The thought brought a smile to her half-asleep face and she snuggled back into the bed, desperately trying to soak up the last of the warmth he left imprinted on the mattress. Little did Naruto know that he wasn't the only one that would start to have strange sensations that morning. Although having had the talk with Temari, Tayuya at least understood what they were, even if she didn't quite understand why they were happening. She neglected to tell Naruto because she honestly thought he wouldn't care. After her equally long, if not slightly longer shower, she stepped out of the bathroom with a towel wrapped around her body. The benefit of Naruto being a morning person and her most certainly not being a morning person meant she always had the room to herself once he had gotten ready. She looked at the curtained window and the weak light that was barely able to filter through the tiny gap. Chuckling to herself, she figured Naruto was out training right about now. He was so predictable to her it wasn't even amusing. Well, okay, it was a little amusing to her. Of course, she never would have expected him to be in the room next to theirs talking with Gaara about subjects that were quickly bringing a blush to the sand wielder's otherwise impassive face. Naruto, do you really think I'm the best person to talk with this about? Naruto just looked at him funnily, his eyebrow raised in a curious manner. Gaara just sighed. He loved his friend like a brother, possibly more, yet he could be a real idiot sometimes. You're the one that reads those perverted books. I would think you would know more about this than me, he said in his normal deadpan manner, but he still couldn't hide the trace embarrassment that crept in. Hey, they're not perverted. Gaara just put his palm to his forehead, trying to stave off the headache this conversation was surely going to give him. Naruto, did you even listen to me? Don't you read the other parts of those books? Naruto nodded, his own small blush now developing as he thought back to some of the more heated moments in his favorite literary series. Doesn't that explain how everything works? Naruto looked confused for a moment before squinting his eyes and concentrating on what the scenes actually said. It didn't help that he usually skimmed over them, only picking up the barest of details. Suddenly his eyes shot out to the size of dinner plates, which would have been an amusing sight if Gaara didn't know what he was thinking about. Oh, so that's what the author's always talking about. He smiled, feeling pleased with himself for working it out on his own, until he realized just what he worked out. Red once again covered his face as he realized just what his little friend meant when it pressed against Tayuya like that. Oh crap, Gaara, you have to help me control it. It was the redhead's turn to open his eyes wide. What the hell do you mean control it? Naruto opened his mouth, ready to reply in his usual hothead manner, but his mind drew a blank and he ended up looking like some comical imitation of a fish. He flopped back down onto Gaara's bed. Oh man, what am I going to do? I need to talk to somebody about this, but who? A large man with long spiky white hair sneezed loudly, only saved from being located thanks to the privacy seal he had drawn up for himself that kept the worst of his giggling from being heard. He rubbed his nose, smirking to himself. Some foxy young lady must be talking about me to her friends. Jiraiya, you old fiend, you. I've still got it. He happily returned to writing notes in his small journal. The research was progressing well today. Gaara just looked at him. As lost as his friend was, there was no real point asking someone who knew less about it that you did, so Naruto just resigned himself. He tried to clear his mind by training, using the harsh physical exercise to exhaust his mind and body. He was rather upset. Today had started out so well and now he was as confused as he had been the first time he noticed Tayuya start to change. This was how Hana found him, the scent of his sweat drawing her over. It was unusual because most Inuzukas trained with their companions out in the training fields. She wasn't afraid to admit that the scent of sweat and hard training aroused her slightly. Her family did share almost too much in common with dogs after all. That was why she was surprised to find Naruto out behind his building up in a tree doing pull-ups. Except he was a shinobi, and Naruto, so there had to be some unique slant to it. To work himself that little bit extra, he was upside down with his feet stuck to a high branch using only chakra. She watched him for a few minutes as he lifted his body up until he could touch his toes before allowing his body to return to a vertical position in a controlled manner. It was impressive to say the least, although she had seen similar workouts from Might Guy. Of course, the young shinobi up in the tree had significantly better fashion sense than the self-proclaimed handsome beast of the Leaf Village. She smirked, not noticing as Naruto silently dropped out of the tree, spotting her for the first time. Oh hi Hana, sorry if I disturbed you. She looked up from her thoughts, nearly jumping when she found Naruto right next to her. She cursed. With her enhanced senses she should have noticed him before he got anywhere near that close. Oh no Naruto, I was just curious to see who was training back here. She looked him over curiously, something that seemed to be more common the longer she was around the strange sand shinobi. Don't you have the first round of the Chunin exams today? Why are you out training? He just shrugged, grimacing as his scent finally caught up to him. I never miss an opportunity in the morning, he said it with a smile as he was walking away, obviously for his second shower this morning. Just then an idea occurred to him and some red invaded the bridge of his nose as he turned to look back at Hana. Hana. She had been bemusedly watching him leave until he turned around, catching her staring, and even though he didn't notice, some red managed to invade her own cheeks. Yes Naruto. He walked back to her, still blushing slightly as he fought for the right words to say. Kiba said you're a vet, so you work with animals, right? Like a medic. She smirked, wondering where this was going. Actually I am a medic nin, I'm just a vet as well because it suits our clan. Humans are just animals after all. He seemed even more pleased with her answer. Well so what does it mean when? He started blushing more profusely and in the end just started lowering his hand and motioning to his lower region. Hana didn't quite get what he meant at first until realization struck and she had to fight back a laugh. Oh don't worry about that pup, it just means you're growing up is all. He seemed rather sated by that but suddenly took notice of what she had called her. Hey I'm not a pup. Hana just chuckled, walking past Naruto and ruffling his already unruly hair. Oh but you're a pup. Naruto looked particularly irritated by the contact but managed to control himself long enough to turn and call back to her. So that's it, it's just natural. She chuckled again, having to remind herself just how young shinobi started. It seemed like an odd thought considering she was only 4 years his senior, but then again she was an Inuzuka and they all learned this stuff at a very young age. Perfectly, come and see me sometime and I'll explain it better to you. She left Naruto feeling rather awkward as he quickly hurried back inside to grab another shower before the three of them had to go for the first round. They walked through the building, marveling at just how many ninja of all nationalities, except Iwa and Kumo, were here. They walked up the stairs and Naruto was about to walk into a corridor when Tayuya grabbed him from behind. What are you doing, shithead? Room 301 inches. Naruto looked at her strangely and motioned to the classroom down the hall where a few of the entrants were huddled around a doorway. Yeah, That's room 301. Tayuya just glared at him and Gaara let slip a rare smile. You fucktard, that's obviously a genjutsu. Honestly, after all this time you'd think you'd be able to see the basic fucking ones like that. He rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. Now that it had been pointed out, he could in fact spot the rather obvious genjutsu placed on the classroom sign. The problem for him with genjutsu was that his heightened senses meant when a genjutsu was placed over him it made everything seem even more real. It was the one weakness to his usually advantageous ability. Yeah, sorry, Tayuya just playfully slapped him on the back of his head for being an idiot, not really in the mood for fighting. She wouldn't admit it, but she was almost as excited for this as Naruto was. She saw it as the first true test of her skills that would actually have some evidence to help her evaluate herself. She couldn't honestly give a damn if she made Chunin or not. The next exams were in sooner after all, so she would easily ace those, but it was the challenge she relished. They made it to the correct room this time, Naruto still acting sheepish over his blunder. They entered into the crowded classroom, nobody even bothering to turn for the new arrivals. The room was nearly full to capacity anyway. The trio shrugged and made their way over to the back of the staggered classroom where Temari, Kankuro, and their teammate were sitting. They took a seat next to their fellow Sand Nin and casually awaited the arrival of the proctor. Naruto looked around, scoping out some of the competition. He quickly spotted the Konoha genin, and there were quite a lot of them. He counted 12 rookies and a few others that were obviously retaking. He noticed one of the older ones, the one with glassed and odd white hair, approached the younger shinobi and laid out cards before them. With his decent sight, Naruto could at least pick out they were some kind of information cards, although on what he couldn't figure out. What he did know was that he did not like that young man. He smelled all too familiar. It was weaker and almost second-hand, but there was the unmistakable scent of snakes and deep underground places about the odd man. He tried to listen in on their conversation, but through the throng of people all conversing with one another he could only pick out scattered fragments. Everybody got a show, however, as a strange hunched-over shinobi with a large metal gauntlet took a swipe at the bespectacled Leaf Nin. Naruto watched on curiously as he dodged the blow, yet even so his glasses cracked and he keeled over, clutching his ears. Naruto immediately guessed sonic attack. He was definitely going to have to be wary about that one. He couldn't help but smirk as the leaf ninja writhed on the floor in pain before noticing just who had attacked him. Sound ninja, they were told to be wary of them. There was no solid evidence suggesting they were involved with Orochimaru. However, from the way he would have had the sand ally with them, it was an educated guess that they were. They certainly lived up to their namesake if they really did use sound-based attacks. Naruto noticed he wasn't the only one fixated on their odd method of fighting as he saw Tayuya riveted on the bandaged shinobi's gauntlet. He was about to comment on that, most likely in a sarcastic manner, when what looked like a large smoke bomb erupted at the front of the room. Alright, you baby-faced degenerates, pipe down and listen up. It's time to begin. I am Ibiki Morino, your proctor, and from this moment, your worst enemy. When everybody was sitting in their proper places, more specifically away from their teammates, and Ibiki had explained the rules, everybody began the test in front of them. Naruto just stared at it with wide eyes. There were only 9 questions, but each one looked like it was more suited to an Anbu exam, not Chunin. Hell, half the stuff on this sheet of paper looked more like advanced arithmetic rather than stuff that could actually help with being a ninja. And what was all that about point deduction if caught cheating? That in itself was weird. Why wouldn't they just disqualify you outright for catching you doing something like that? Naruto was practically despairing as he repeatedly, but softly as to not interrupt the other candidates, banged his head on the table. He stopped after a few moments, realizing that he might be misinterpreted as some kind of code. Luckily for Naruto, he was not alone in the room, and a few minutes into the test he began to notice sand coalescing on his desk, just to the right of his paper. Quickly it formed into words, then sentences. Soon all the answers to the test were right in front of him. He smiled to himself, reminding himself to thank Gaara after this was all done. No doubt he was using his third eye technique to gain the answers before sending them to him and most likely Tayuya. He didn't exactly like the idea of cheating to get by, but if it meant he carried on further into the exam he could live with it. Finally finished, he made a distinct, but short tapping motion with his foot, and immediately the sand dispersed, floating back into fine particles, no doubt on their way back to Gaara's gourd. He leaned back on his chair, rather comfortable now that he didn't have to worry. In his panic, he had barely noticed that a few other teams had been caught cheating enough times to earn disqualification. Now that he was safe, he could watch as the numbers slowly whittled down in threes. It seemed a bit unfair that one person's cheating meant disqualification for their entire team, but then again, if his had been caught, it would have been perfectly just. Finally, once there were only a few minutes to go until the 10th question was revealed, everybody seemed to have completed the test. He idly wondered how the Konoha teams did, as well as Kankuro and Temari. Finally, the clock showed that their 45 minutes were up and everybody leaned forward in their chair expectantly as Ibiki explained the rules for the last question. Many of the genin were outraged, as was Naruto, although he said nothing. Drawing attention to himself at this point wouldn't do him or his friends any good. Although if he knew them as well as he did, then Tayuya was just as angry as he was. Even so, they calmly waited, not taking the bait as many teams began forfeiting from the exams. It was just unfortunate that they were using psychological warfare on the young minds, a subject that Baki-sensei just happened to be an expert in. They waited it out until it seemed there was nobody left that was going to leave, leaving the classroom much sparser than it had been at the start. Finally, Ibiki revealed the significance of the final question and Naruto grinned wildly, knowing that he was through to the next round. It was certainly a good feeling as he put his feet up on the table in front of him, smiling broadly and soaking in the small victory. Ibiki was about to go on and explain further when the window to the right of the room suddenly burst inwards, showering the scarred proctor with a hail of glass. 4 kunai shot through the new opening into the room, each attached to a corner of a large banner which unfurled mid-flight. The kunai embedded themselves into the walls, proudly displaying the message and releasing the woman inside simultaneously. Naruto just stared at her, vibrant purple hair, a long tan trench coat, a skirt that was far from decent, not to mention her mesh shirt that only contained a thin grey shirt underneath, not leaving much to the imagination. Heads up, boys and girls, this is no time to be celebrating. I'll be your next proctor, Anko Mitarashi. Most of the Chunin hopefuls in the room just stared at her, wide-eyed and slack-jawed. Naruto, on the other hand, had to stifle a laugh at the brilliant entrance as he held a thumbs up to the eccentric but definitely interesting woman. Anko noticed this and smirked, glad at least one of the little brats could understand a good entrance. Right then, are you ready for the second test? Good, now follow me. She stuck her hand up in a way that made Naruto have to stifle another laugh and only increased the awkward discomfort in the room. Ibiki appeared from around the side of the banner, looking highly irritated at the outlandish Tokubutsu Jonin's antics. You're early, again. Anko didn't exactly look pleased to hear that, and this time Naruto couldn't hold it back. He let out a loud laugh which only further annoyed Anko. She recovered quickly, looking around the room at all the prospects, nodding her satisfaction. Good work for once, Ibiki, only 12 teams. Ibiki just sent her an irritated glare that she completely ignored. Well, alright maggots, you think you're so great because you survived this one little test. Well, by the time I'm through with you there'll be less than half of you left. I'll let your squad leaders know where to meet tomorrow morning. Dismissed. And with that, everybody who had survived the first day of the Chunin exams filed out of the room. Naruto, Tayuya, and Gaara were among the last. He couldn't help it. When Naruto passed by the eccentric shinobi, he couldn't help but turn and compliment her. Great entrance. Anko immediately narrowed her eyes at the little punk that was mocking her, but she quickly understood he had meant it honestly if the laughter still fresh on his face was evidence. She wasn't quite sure how to process it at first. Nobody ever really paid heed to her antics and pranks. In fact, most just ignored her completely. Thanks, Gaki, but don't get too cocky. You're not going to like me if you make it through the second exam. Naruto only maintained his smile and stared at her. We'll see. Before she could react, he was already out the door with Anko watching him leave. A very amused Ibiki watched her rather shocked reaction, savoring the unusual occurrence for a moment. So is that all it takes to get under your skin nowadays, Anko? Blonde hair and a smile. The irate Kunoiki rounded on the interrogation expert, her eyes flaming. Oh, shut it, Scarface. And like a flash she was out of the same window she had come in by, leaving a rather startled Ibiki in her wake. Boy, that was one strange kid, funny, but strange. He grinned, but that quickly dissipated when he turned and realized that Anko had left the banner up from her ridiculous entrance. With a groan he ordered one of the Chunin on the side of the room to tear it down before he walked out of the room in a much more irritable manner than he had entered. That damn woman will be the death of me. Everybody just stared at the imposing sight in front of them. Trees the size of buildings, deadly animals in plain sight, and a general feeling of darkness and despair that emanated from the ominous training ground like a scent. Anko stood in front of them, facing away from the flimsy piece of metal that someone might call a fence. She soaked in the awed and frightened face, taking pleasure at how her personal training ground was having its usual effect. That was until she came across a certain spiky-haired blonde and his team. Oh no, a forest with water and plenty of animals to hunt, however will we survive? Out of nowhere a kunai flew directly at him. He tried to dodge, but it had been so unexpected that it managed to nick his cheek, drawing a thin line of blood. Anko suddenly appeared behind him in an impressive show of speed, her mouth close to his ear. So we've got a tough guy, huh? Well, you should be worried. There's more than animals in that forest that are out for your blood. Her eyes opened wide when Naruto suddenly ceased to exist in front of her and she felt a presence behind her back. Before she could react, a kunai was carefully placed against her cheek, and with a slight motion it created a line about the same length as the one currently on Naruto's. At least she thought it was a kunai. Instead, when she angrily rounded on the cocky brat, she found him holding nothing but a pen. Of course she understood the significance. She had let down her guard and he was in a position where he could have mortally wounded her. She didn't know whether to feel furious, embarrassed, or a little turned on. After all, the Inazukis weren't the only ones that were allowed to be weird when it came to these things. She angrily snatched the offending pen and snapped it with one hand, although much to her chagrin he just smiled at her innocently. She glared at him, trying her best to hide her true feelings behind a mask of anger, even though he didn't look affected. Finally she smiled. A chilling smile that only Anko Mitarashi could pull off, and was a beacon to most leaf shinobi to run for the hills. Nice one, Gaki, you got me. All the Chunin and a few of the Jonin over at the gate waiting for the genin to sign the waivers. Sweat dropped. Everybody Chunin or higher knew of Anko's reputation, and this type of reaction wasn't part of it. She turned around to the rest of the genin who had just stared awkwardly through the whole confrontation and started announcing how the second part of the exam was going to work. Naruto just slinked back over to his team, where Tayuya smacked him in the back of his head. It didn't diminish his smirk, and he could see that she was equally amused by what he did. Anko just stared at his retreating form going back to his team. That was a kid to watch out for. She didn't know if he was all talk and bravado, but she felt like she would have fun finding out. She decided that for the first time since she had started doing the second test for the Chunin exams, she was going to watch from the tower's cameras. There was also something nagging at the back of her mind, somebody he reminded her of, but she just couldn't place it. You shithead, we're supposed to keep out skills under wraps until the last fucking round, now everybody knows you're fast. Naruto just smiled at her, which made her involuntarily smile back. They haven't seen anything yet. Every team had been given their respective scroll, all of them had signed the death waivers, and they all stood outside of the gates waiting for the signal to be given to start. Naruto took waiting to mean he had an opportunity to read his oh-so-enjoyable book. Tayuya was eyeing him irritably, still not having caught up to him despite her persistence. Gaara was just idly leaning on the fence, wondering how long it was going to take them to find another team and get to the tower in the center. He smirked. Between his sand and Naruto's nose they would get though this in an hour tops. He frowned slightly. It was a real shame that Tayuya hadn't come into her all yet, them not having use for genjutsu for now. He hoped that would change by the time they got to the last round at least. Perhaps it might even come in handy in the forest, but he doubted that slightly. Then again, it had proved useful for getting the drop on their enemies in the past. He made a promise not to let Tayuya's tremendous talents go to waste here. However, he didn't want to squeeze her into a plan for that reason alone. He shook his head clear of the thoughts. He was worrying over nothing. Tayuya was a valued and irreplaceable part of their team, and he wouldn't trade her for anybody. He smiled as he watched her scowl at Naruto. She may not be a Jinchuriki, but she could certainly be as frightening as one. Suddenly all three ninja received a small surprise as Anko dropped out of nowhere. However, the real surprising thing was that none of them reacted. Gaara wasn't sure if it was because he had smelled her coming or not, but Naruto didn't even look up from his book. He read on a few more lines before folding the corner of the page and slowly closing the book in a manner that always drove Baki-sensei insane. It was Naruto's method of royally annoying anybody of a higher rank than himself. Oh great, here I was thinking you guys might actually prove entertaining, and I find that you read those same stupid books as Kakashi. She seemed genuinely disappointed, until Naruto reached behind him into the small pouch on his hip. Anko tensed, wary due to their last encounter, but he simply pulled his hand back around, holding onto an identical copy of the book in his other hand. He threw the small orange book over to the special Jonin, who deftly caught it and looked at the offending object like she might catch a disease from it. You should try reading it, you might actually enjoy it. And with that, Naruto seemed to almost dismiss her as he returned to reading his book. Anko just couldn't believe how this genin was acting around her. If she didn't know any better, she would think he was Kakashi's personal clone. Except that wasn't quite right, it went beyond that. There it was again, that nagging feeling that she should know his face from somewhere. She decided to ask Kakashi himself about it, seeing as the two seemed to share so many similarities. She took off, quite intent on retreating from the unnaturally cool blonde before he could embarrass her further, not even realizing she was still holding on to the present Naruto had given to her. Naruto, on the other hand, had noticed and was smirking, one eye on Anko as she left. Tayuya didn't get a chance to berate him for his latest strange behavior, as with a buzz the gates into the Forest of Death opened and the three sand shinobi sprinted in. Despite many of the ninja teams immediately heading into the trees as soon as the gates opened, the sand trio stayed on the ground. While trees offered a height advantage and the ability to travel faster, they were more in their element, closer to the ground, or at least Gaara was. Tayuya was the same in both environments, as was Naruto, despite his surprising proficiency in tree running. The dimmer conditions didn't affect them either, thanks to Naruto's and Gaara's more sensitive eyes and Tayuya's practice with getting around in the dark. It also limited their opponents. The Konoha shinobi would no doubt stick to the trees as it was their natural environment. Naruto had no idea about the sound's preferences, but he at least knew that the grass ninja would no doubt stick to the ground level like them. Right now he was tracking the scent of wet grass that was steadily heading closer to them. At the same time, he was keeping tabs on all of the shinobi in the vicinity. Gaara protected them from the various dangerous fauna that were stupid or brave enough to attack them. After a while, though, they seemed to get the idea that coming near the human child with the strange container was a bad idea. Contrary to many ninja ideals of getting in and out quickly, the three were taking it relatively slow, being careful to not give away their own position. They only had to speed up when he smelled the grass ninja moving closer to another group of shinobi, most likely Leaf. He smirked. This was perfect. Now the two teams would fight it out and they could merely pick off the winners, weakened as they would be. It was hardly the most honorable or courageous thing to do, but they were ninja, that wasn't part of the job. When you had an advantage, you took it. Most would be stupid not to, and those were the ninja that got killed. He felt the two groups draw closer. From the way they moved, Naruto could tell the Konoha team were completely unprepared for the attack. Naruto frowned as he felt two of the scents from the grass nin take off, leaving only one still heading towards the group. That was strange. Naruto thought they must be forming some kind of plan, but the other two kept on moving, further into the forest. He quickly informed his teammates of the strange occurrence and they were just as confused as he was. He left Tayuya to mull it over, being the tactician of the group, while they closed in on the groups, now very curious to see what was going on. What they saw surprised them to say the least, a single female grass nin standing high up in the trees facing the three Konoha nin. She seemed to just be glaring at them and they were frozen in fear. Naruto narrowed his eyes, trying to see just what was going on. The Leaf team was comprised of the same genin they had observed in Wave Country, the Uchiha, the pink-haired girl, and the one with black glasses and the long, high-collared grey coat. The glasses-wearing boy was unconscious, barely propped up by the trembling girl as her eyes were firmly fixed on that of the grass ninjas. Suddenly Naruto caught another scent on the air and his eyes narrowed into a hateful glare. From the grass ninja, no matter how well it was hidden beneath genjutsus and other means, he could still smell Orochimaru's vile stench. He only seemed to have noticed the new arrivals now, looking down at them with a vicious smile and almost amused eyes. Ah, so it's the boy with the impressive nose. He looked across at Gaara, who was still uninformed of just who this was, and the fatherless one. His lips curled up into an ugly smile as he licked his lips with an abnormally long tongue. Gaara narrowed his eyes, wondering who was defiant enough to call him that, or how they even knew. Naruto tried to stay calm, but he was finding that extremely difficult with the murderer of his friend's father so close. Orochimaru. It was a growl more than anything else as he fought to stop himself just blindly jumping at the man. This was one of Konoha's most dangerous missing ninja. there was no way Naruto could take him on by himself. Of course Gaara wasn't nearly as able to control himself. He had just learned that his father's killer was standing across from him, within the range of his sand. It reacted immediately. The entire gourd broke apart, revealing the entirety of Gaara's sand, all of which immediately lashed out in Orochimaru's direction. The snake Sannin jumped out of the way with time to spare but watched in quiet intrigue as the whip of sand leveled the small area of forestry behind where he had stood. It didn't stop there though. As soon as Gaara noticed the missing nin's movement, he redirected some of the sand. This time it came much closer, Orochimaru having to physically exert himself to bend his grotesquely lithe body underneath the practical wall of sand. Gaara's eyes were burning and his mouth was pulled up into a snarl that matched Tayuya on her worst days. As his sand did its work, he slowly walked across the clearing, eyes never leaving Orochimaru's form as he danced about in the trees. Each blow was more vicious and stronger than its predecessor, and soon there were no trees left for the pale-skinned man to jump to. He was tired of playing around anyway. When the next sand whip came at him, he didn't even bother to move. All Naruto saw was a glint of steel before the sand overwhelmed him. Suddenly the stream parted, curving around the murderer. Naruto saw why. Emerging from the man's mouth was a large sword that actually split the sand straight down the middle. Unfortunately Gaara couldn't see this from his position. All he did was keep the barrage hammering in on the man. He wasn't planning on letting him go now that he finally had him. Then all at once Orochimaru vanished, appearing moments later behind Gaara with his sword poised to strike through the boy's heart. His sand was only just fast enough to intercept the strike before it would have pierced his heart. It only slowed the blade, but that was enough time for more of Gaara's defense to congregate at the point's position and reinforce the shield that had sprung up. Orochimaru jumped back before a large spike emerged from the wall, right where the snake man's head would have been. Naruto had been standing still, shocked by the raw ferocity Gaara displayed, leveling the clearing and attacking his father's killer. He finally saw his opportunity to attack while the man was focused on his friend, but as soon as he made a move, a purple and white blur appeared in front of him, hand on his chest. Naruto was about to slug the guy before he saw the leaf headband and held his fist back an inch from his side. "Don't get involved. This is my fight, he attacked me." Naruto just looked at him, annoyed and dumbfounded. Noticing the red eyes the now true Uchiha possessed, as well as the single tomo of one eye and the double in the other. "What the hell are you talking about? Don't you know who that?" He jumped back as another one of Gaara's sand whips, which were looking more and more like arms as the seconds trickled by, smashed through what was left of the tree above them. He backflipped backwards just in time for the trunk to smash into the ground where he stood. He was about to make another move to help his friend when he saw the Uchiha leap out from cover and engaged Orochimaru. Naruto couldn't help but watch the rather impressive display of taijutsu from the genin. He definitely hadn't been that good when they observed him in wave. Even though Orochimaru dodged every single blow that came his way, they still came hard and fast. Eventually the snake Sannin either got bored or he was actually feeling hard-pressed. Naruto thought the former more likely, and when he backhanded Sasuke and sent him flying across the clearing to crash painfully into a tree trunk. He was obviously about to go and finish the job or whatever it was he planned when he saw movement out of the corner of his eye. He dodged just as Naruto's fist came sailing over his torso. Naruto just followed his momentum, moving over Orochimaru and attempting a strong kick to the man's side. He simply grabbed Naruto's foot out of the air and threw him with strength unexpected for a man of his build. Naruto twisted in the air, landing feet first against the trunk he had been thrown at, only to coil up tightly and pounce right back. Orochimaru once again avoided the punch, noticing the hand was splayed, as if the genin was trying to slap him. He soon understood why when 4 rips appeared across his face. Naruto was under a henge, but that didn't mean his claws weren't still there. He looked up, quite pleased that he had landed a blow, only to see a most horrific sight. Orochimaru stood there, his mouth curled up into that same bone-chilling smile, only half his face was hanging off in tatters. Below it was merely another face. It revealed the faint purple tattoos on the sides of his nose and his pallid, sickly skin. Naruto wasn't sure whether or not to be disgusted or intrigued. He decided on the former as he continued to stare at the grotesque sight. "Most impressive, Naruto. It has been a while since anybody came close to hurting me like that. It really is a shame about your resident. Otherwise I believe you might make the absolute perfect candidate for just what I have planned." His smile somehow grew even more evil and his eyes bored into Naruto's own, freezing him in place with the intent behind them. As it is, I have plans for young Sasuke here, so if you don't mind. Quote. With that, the snake Sannin broke his gaze with Naruto, only for the young boy to freeze again as Orochimaru's neck elongated in an impossible manner. The newly lengthened appendage shot across the clearing, fang-like teeth bared and aimed directly at Sasuke's neck. The Sannin closed its eyes and bit down into the soft flesh, working the necessary jutsu in his mind as slowly the three-pronged seal coalesced on soft skin. He pulled back to admire his handiwork, only to snarl in barely concealed rage as he saw a flash of red hair. Tayuya's eyes were opened wide in shock, unblinking and unfocused as she just stood there for a moment. She had a kunai raised out in front of herself, but it harmlessly clattered to the ground before she fell forward, out of the tree. That was certainly enough to get Naruto moving as he raced across the clearing in a split second, catching Tayuya in both of his arms. He worriedly looked over her, noticing the bite mark that still bled as well as the tattoo-like Tritomo mark just behind it. Tayuya was shaking in his arms, violently convulsing with her eyes screwed up in agony even though she was unconscious. Naruto just stared down at her helplessly, not even having the first clue on how to help his friend. He clutched her a bit closer to his chest and turned to stare at the man who had done this with murder flaming in his eyes. Orochimaru just seemed amused once again, if not slightly annoyed. What did you do? Orochimaru shrugged nonchalantly, rolling his eyes in exasperation. Really now, is that the thanks I get? His smirk returned. If she survives, think of it as a gift, the best she has ever received. His grin hid his irritation at the whole situation. He only had enough chakra to place one curse mark every 2 days, so it meant that Sasuke would have to wait. Orochimaru was patient, however, he still had time and there would be other opportunities. Even though he was in deep thought, he still dodged the fist of sand aimed his way. Gaara had caught his bearings enough to renew his attack on the evil man before them, having seen what he did to Tayuya. For his part, Orochimaru was finished here. He could not mark Sasuke yet, and there was no sense just standing around toying with a bunch of snot-nosed genin. He took off and Gaara was about to run after him when he heard Naruto's desperate plea for help. His gaze only flickered once between the retreating Sannin and his friend, clutching his other friend to his chest before running over to offer what help he could. What he saw was not good. Tayuya was pale, unnaturally so, and she was sporadically convulsing. Her eyes were screwed shut as if any light might blind her indefinitely, and her hands were clenched into fists so tight she drew blood. Gaara looked down on her as helplessly as Naruto had, not knowing at all how he could possibly help her. We need to get her to the tower. Naruto stared blankly at him before the words set in and a determined mask slipped over his features. He gently lay the struggling girl down and immediately sprinted over to where Sasuke was still unconscious, propped up in the crater he had made, impacting on the trunk. He searched through the boy's pockets but growled in frustration when he couldn't find his scroll. He turned angrily on the last conscious member of the Konoha team, the pink-haired Kunoichi, who had simply stared in awe and fear at the entire encounter. Where is your scroll? The trembling girl turned to him, looking at him with slightly unfocused eyes, so Naruto grabbed her shoulders and shook her a little until she snapped out of it. Your scroll, where is it? He ate it. He let go over her shoulders and grunted in frustration, his mouth curled into an irritated snarl as he rushed back to his other teammates. Tayuya was still in trouble, so he quickly picked her up and slung her over his shoulder. He didn't like to treat her this way, but he had no choice. He didn't know how much time he had. Gaara saw him pick the girl up and shoot off into the trees, close on his heels, but due to Naruto's unfettered speed he was actually falling behind. Naruto was just following his nose. Right now he didn't care who it was, Konoha Nin, Sound Nin, hell even Temari's team. If they had an earth scroll then they were fair game. He sped towards the nearest scent, completely uncaring of who saw, heard or detected them, just wanting to get there. He broke out of the trees to see some rather surprised leaf shinobi. It was the older ones that included the bespectacled, white-haired one. He used their momentary surprise to lightly set Tayuya down and giving her one last worried look before turning around to stare down the three men. They didn't know what to make of an amazingly fast genin popping out of the trees right on top of them without any way of signifying where he was from. All they saw was the 9 engraved on his forehead protector, wondering briefly what that meant as they dropped into their respective fighting stances. They didn't have to wait long to learn why when viscous orange chakra bubbled around Naruto's flesh, encircling him and cocooning him in a shroud of the boiling substance. Almost lazily a large tail bubbled out of the shroud as 2 flickering ears grew in a similar manner around his head. Naruto had been hunched over, staring at the ground through the whole process, but when he looked up he caused all three of the ninja to falter slightly. His blue eyes were gone, replaced by the ferocious and unforgiving red ones that looked hungrily at them with barely contained rage. His teeth were fangs, jutting out from his mouth enough to be seen when he had it closed. He was on all fours now, but the shinobi were back in their stances, preparing themselves for the attack. Unfortunately, nothing could have prepared them from Naruto's unconstrained wrath. He was there 1 second before. With barely a flicker he vanished, instantly appearing behind one of the ninjas with the masks. Which, right now in the heated moment, Naruto couldn't care less as he rounded his body and delivered a kick directly to the man's temple. The chakra-infused blow sent the man careening away from him. What happened to him? Again Naruto didn't care. By the time the man's teammates looked around he had already vanished and reappeared behind the other masked one and performed the exact same maneuver, receiving the exact same results. Kabuto didn't even bother to look around as he heard the other kick connect to his teammate's skull. Instead he instantly diverted chakra to his hand, forming his deadly chakra scalpel. Without even hesitating he swung around, bringing the makeshift blade up in an arc, hitting Naruto square in the chest. The enraged Jinchuriki staggered back. Even through his protective aura he felt that blow. One of his lungs had been punctured and a few arteries near his heart were severed. He dropped to one knee, fist down on the ground. He already felt the damage being healed, but Kabuto wasn't going to give him the time. He brought the scalpel back up to slice the boy's head clean from his shoulders, certain he wouldn't be able to regenerate that. His mouth curled into a smile eerily similar to that of his master's as the glowing green hand descended on unprotected flesh. It would have worked had a shield of sand not appeared between his hand and the Jinchuriki. He turned to face the newcomer, his worst mistake to date, as Naruto had finished recovering. His hand shot out through the sand which parted at his touch, only to wrap around the white-haired traitor's neck. Kabuto could feel the claws draw blood where they met his skin and winced from the pain. He was already diverting chakra in order to repair the wounds and break down the carbon dioxide in his lungs back into oxygen. Naruto just tightened his grip on the man's neck. His chakra cloak was beginning to recede and he was thinking more clearly now. He let go when the man's eyes rolled back and his entire body went limp. He didn't even shoot a glance at Gaara as he approached the scene, instead rooting through the man's pockets until he found what he was looking for. He triumphantly held up the earth scroll in his hand before rushing past a concerned Gaara to where Tayuya now lay motionless on the ground. She had stopped convulsing and Naruto didn't know if that was good or bad. She was still breathing, at least that was good, although it was labored and painful to just look at. Now out of his slightly crazed state of worry he took the time to carefully lift Tayuya into a bridle position so as not to aggravate her condition. He took off quickly in the direction of the tower, but this time at a pace that Gaara could match. The fate of the Konoha team or Kabuto's team was completely out of his mind now. All he cared about was getting Tayuya somewhere she could be helped. At their pace they reached the tower in just under an hour. Every animal that approached them was viciously and mercilessly smashed back by a wall of sand. This brought the total time to 1 hour and 29 minutes. Not that Naruto would even remotely care that they just smashed the previous record by over 4 hours. He crashed through the doors into the plain stone room, paying no attention to the large plaque hanging on the far wall. Frantically he looked around for somebody, anybody to come to their aid, however there wasn't a soul in sight. He looked at the 2 scrolls. The damn things nearly cost Tayuya her life. He angrily threw them to the ground. By some miracle the 2 long pieces of paper unraveled and crossed over one another, the 2 half-seals completing each other. Naruto coughed from the mass of smoke that suddenly puffed into existence in front of him. When it dissipated he noticed a smiling Junin standing in the middle of the seal, or at least he thought the man was smiling. The mask made it rather difficult to tell. All he had to go on was the closed eye curved upwards into a crescent and the slight creasing of the mask around his mouth. However, the smile dropped when Kakashi noticed the condition of the redhead held in Naruto's arms. He immediately rushed over, relieving Naruto of his obligation as he took the girl from his arms and laid her out on a bed in the corner of the room. Naruto didn't realize just how tired he was from that fight and the sprint to the tower until he felt Tayuya's body leave his arms. He may have had bucket loads of stamina, but that didn't stop his body from feeling exhaustion when it happened. Using Kyuubi's chakra, despite having her permission, was still taxing on his body. His coils were still unused to the foreign chakra. He did manage to stay awake though long enough to see Kakashi begin to draw out complicated patterns around the strange mark on Tayuya's shoulder. Past that Naruto couldn't remember as he felt his eyelids become heavier and heavier. His legs felt like lead and soon his body followed as he dropped to the ground like a stone. Gaara paced the small room, his neutral face belying his concern for the two teenagers laid out on adjacent beds. He had been at this activity ever since Kakashi had finished sealing the curse mark. Now aside from the three spiraling tomo on her neck, Tayuya had the makings of an intricate tribal tattoo. The strange and complicated circular seal wound around the original mark, occasionally spiking out at 6 points. Gaara hated looking at it. To him it was a reminder of how he had lost his focus and his friend had paid the price. With a sigh he looked across at Naruto. He knew the blonde too well, and no matter how bad Gaara felt, he knew that Naruto would feel much worse. It was almost as if Naruto had taken on personal responsibility for Tayuya. When he saw and understood what the bastard snake had done to her, he would feel guilt followed by anger. Gaara had asked Kakashi what he was doing at the time, but he ignored the sand wielder. He required utmost concentration when performing the complex seal and had thought it better to tell them all when the others had woken up. This left Gaara in his current position, walking up and down the length of the small room until one of them awoke. At this rate he feared he was going to wear a trench into the floor, and if he grew impatient enough he might just do that to take out some of his frustrations. Luckily he was saved from lashing out with his chakra-infused sand as he heard the sound he had been waiting for. Naruto groaned while rubbing his eyes as he sat up from the hard, uncomfortable bed that had been provided. His first thought had been how strange it was to not wake up greeted by a curtain of red hair. The only times he and Tayuya wouldn't sleep together were on missions when they would have to take turns in the rotation of guard duty. Of course, these thoughts of Tayuya immediately reminded him of the events before he passed out, and his head frantically snapped around to search the small room. He sighed in relief when he spotted the girl in the bed beside him and saw Gaara walking over, slight concern etched on his features as he made his own examination of his friend. "How do you feel?" Naruto looked at him, smiling at the concern his friend so rarely showed. "Fine, just a little sore." Gaara nodded. While it was uncommon due to their large chakra capacities, they both had felt the aching effects of chakra exhaustion before. It was like somebody removing all of your blood only to reintroduce it very slowly. Naruto turned his attention back toward the person he was actually worried about. "How's Tayuya? Did we make it back in time? What about the mark? Is she going to be okay?" Gaara took a moment to process the rush of questions and allowed the blonde to calm down before answering. "Tayuya is fine, merely unconscious. We made it in time for one of the Leaf Junin to perform some kind of counter-seal on the mark. I do not know the specifics of what he did, but I expect that when Tayuya wakes up we will be informed. As for your last question," he too took a look at his teammate, friend that lay peacefully on the worn gray sheets of the bed. "I do not know. I think I can help with that." The two genin spun around at the unexpected voice. Naruto cursed himself. He had been so focused on Tayuya he had completely ignored everything else. Now that he was more alert, he could clearly smell the presence of the Junin that had just shunshined into the room. "You." Naruto pointed an accusatory finger at the silver-haired Junin, who gained an amused expression before pointing to himself. "Me." He said it with his strange eye smile that Naruto still couldn't quite work out. It made him curious about what was under the mask. Of course he shrugged off the thoughts as he had more important and pressing matters to attend to. "Tayuya." That was about as coherent a sentence as Naruto could manage at that moment. Nevertheless, Kakashi understood the sentiment. One would be crazy to say that Kakashi didn't understand concern for a teammate, crazy and masochistic. "Your friend will be fine, Naruto, calm down." Naruto did as the older shinobi asked, taking deep relaxing breaths until he felt he could actually speak properly. His mind completely skipped over the fact that Kakashi somehow knew his name despite the fact he never told the man. What's going to happen to her? Kakashi looked thoughtful for a moment, or at least Naruto thought he did. The mask once again made it difficult to tell. "I think it would be better to tell all of you once she wakes up. Don't worry though, that should be any time n. Why the hell is my head on fucking fire?" They all turned to stare shocked at Tayuya, who was now sat up rubbing her shoulder right where the mark was. "Did that old bitch Chio convince me to drink sake again?" Naruto sighed relieved, although he was slightly concerned that Tayuya seemed to think she was still in the Sand Village. She shook her head and blinked a few times to allow the slight haze that was clouding her mind lift. She stared curiously around the room, looking at the faces of the three ninjas staring at her in turn. What you fuckers looking at? Then it all hit her, the encounter in the forest, Orochimaru, jumping in front of the Uchiha kid when the snaky prick was about to attack, then waking up here. She furrowed her brow, trying to remember how she got here, but all she got was fleeting images of a forest rushing by below her and a burning in her neck. She absent-mindedly rubbed the spot, noticing the slightly silky feel of her skin in that area while turning to Naruto. Oi shithead, what's going on? Naruto just smiled broadly, glad to see that Tayuya hadn't changed at all despite everything that happened. Just as he opened his mouth to answer, Kakashi cut in. I think it's best if I explain it. Naruto turned to him, looking like he still wanted to say something, but he reconsidered and closed his mouth. While you two were unconscious, we found out about Orochimaru's infiltration of the exams. It would appear he placed what's known as a cursed mark on your friend Tayuya here and I. Wait, hold up there, Cyclops. What the fuck did you say? Kakashi sighed, not so much because of the nickname he had received worse, but because he had hoped to skirt around this subject. A curse mark. It is a type of fuinjutsu that we believe Orochimaru developed to enhance his subordinates. He looked at Tayuya's face and realized that she wasn't fully satisfied by the answer. If you want the full explanation, ask Anko. She looked at him curiously, as did Naruto. Both wondered what the eccentric proctor of the second exam had to do with this. Anyway, like I was saying. He shot a look at Tayuya, but she seemed wholly unrepentant, causing the Sharingan user to sigh again. I managed to seal the mark before any damaging effects could take hold. Tayuya shot her head up, her hand immediately moving to the mark on her neck. What damaging effects? Kakashi gave her an eye smile, something that wasn't exactly comforting given the situation. Like I said, there's nothing to worry about as long as you don't use the seal. Again Tayuya rounded on him angrily. I thought you said you sealed the fucking thing. Kakashi dropped the smile, shocking the three genin slightly with how serious he became. Not exactly. The seal I gave you merely neutralizes the corrupting aspect of the mark. The power and effect it has on you is still there. However, use of the mark will override the seal, allowing the mark its original corrupting capabilities back. The strength of the seal I placed is entirely reliant of your will not to use the mark. Should that will falter even momentarily, the mark will begin to take a hold of you more and more. By this point, both Tayuya and Naruto were very pale. They couldn't tell if Gaara had a similar reaction because he was always pale. Then get the fucking thing off of me. Kakashi sighed for the third time. If it was that simple, we would have already done so. However, my knowledge of fuinjutsu is limited. Even then, a sealing master would have difficulty without Orochimaru's original notes. The man was hailed as a genius of his time for many reasons, and his ability to outthink his enemies was one of them. Even Master Jiraiya of the Sannin was unable to remove a cursed mark. Naruto, having listened through this whole conversation with growing dread and concern for his friend, finally found the will to speak. You're wrong. Kakashi looked at him strangely, finding the outburst to be strangely familiar. Tayuya will get through this, we always do together. Naruto just stared at Kakashi with pure determination etched across his features before turning to face Tayuya with all the care and comfort he could manage given the tense circumstances. I promise Tayuya I will help find a way to get that thing off of you. He stood up to his full height, giving Tayuya his widest smile. And you know me, I never go back on my promises. Everybody stared at the blonde with mixed feelings. Tayuya outwardly looked irritated at the overly passionate display, whilst inside she was touched by his caring sentiment. Even after so long, her cold nature was so deeply ingrained that she still found it nigh unbelievable that there could be people who cared for her so selflessly. Kakashi looked at the boy, seeing the Minato in him shine through before turning his attention to the redhead. Redhead, why didn't I see it before? There really is a lot of you in your son, sensei. As touching as this moment is, you have other things to worry about right now. Naruto, fresh from his impassioned speech, turned to the man with a blank, confused look. The next round of the Chunin exams is about to begin upstairs. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.